Okay, Farmer Boy, chapter 10. I numbered my chapters because they're not labeled or numbered. You guys can do that if you're allowed to write in your book. Maybe use a pencil, or ask your parents first. Don't do it if you're using a library book. Chapter 10, The Turn of the Year. So in my book, it's page 105. Sorry. I already messed up. The Turn of the Year. Ooh, let's hope that it's going to be springtime. The winter has been... We're almost halfway through this book. It's been winter the whole time. It makes me cold. Okay, the days were growing longer, but the cold was more intense. Well, there goes that. Father said, when the days begin to lengthen, the cold begins to strengthen. At last, the snow softened a little on the south and west slopes. At noon, the icicles dripped. Sap was rising in the trees, and it was time to make sugar. So here we go. They're making their own sugar. In the cold mornings, just before sunrise, Almanzo and Father set out to the maple grove. Father had a big wooden yoke on his shoulders. Katie's been sick, sorry. Father had a big wooden yoke on his shoulders, and Almanzo had a little yoke. From the ends of the yokes hung strips of moose wood bark and large iron hooks on them, and the big wooden bucket swung from each hook. In every maple tree, Father had bored a small hole and fitted a little wooden spout into it. Sweet maple sap was dripping from the spouts into small pails. Going from tree to tree, Almanzo emptied the sap into the big buckets. The weight hung from his shoulders, but he steadied the buckets with his hands to keep them from swinging. When they were full, he went to the great cauldron and emptied them into it. The huge cauldron hung from a pole set between two trees. Father kept a bonfire blazing under it to boil the sap. Almanzo loved trudging through the frozen wild woods. He walked on snow that had never been walked on before, and only his own tracks followed behind him. Busily, he emptied the little pails into the buckets, and whenever he was thirsty, he drank some of the thin, sweet, icy cold sap. That's different. He liked to go back into the roaring fire.
I did, but I just took one.
Okay. He liked to go back to the roaring fire. He poked it and saw sparks fly. He warmed his face and hands in the scorching heat and smelled the sap boiling. Then he went into the woods again. At noon, all the sap was boiling in the cauldron. Father opened the lunch pail, and Almanzo sat on a log beside him. They ate and talked. Their feet were stretched out to the fire, and a pile of logs was at their backs. All around them were snow and ice and wild woods, but they were snug and cozy. After they had eaten, Father stayed by the fire to watch the sap, but Almanzo hunted wintergreen berries. Under the snow on the south slopes, the bright red berries were ripe among their thick green leaves. Almanzo took off his mittens and pawed away the snow with his bare hands. Obviously, you don't go looking for berries unless you know what they are. He knows what they are. He found the red clusters and filled his mouth full. The cold berries crunched between his teeth. Ooh, I hope they're not ginseng berries. The cold berries crunched between his teeth, gushing out their aromatic juice. Nothing else was ever so good as wintergreen berries dug out of the snow. Almanzo's clothes were covered with snow. His fingers were stiff and red with cold, but he never left a south slope until he had pawed it all over. When the sun was low behind the maple trunks, Father threw some snow on the fire, and it died in sizzles and steam. Then Father dipped the hot syrup into the buckets. He and Almanzo set their shoulders under the yolks again and carried the buckets home. They poured the syrup into Mother's big brass kettle on the cook stove. Then Almanzo began the chores while Father fetched the rest of the syrup from the woods. Wonder how many trips he had to make. After supper, the syrup was ready to sugar off. Mother ladled it into 6-quart milk pans and left it to cool. In the morning, every pan held a big cake of solid maple sugar. Mother dumped out the round, golden brown cakes and stored them on the top pantry shelves. I mean, I wonder if that's what she makes her cakes and stuff out of, or her pies. Well, that would be good. Day after day, the sap was running, and every morning Almanzo went with Father to gather and boil it. Every night, Mother sugared it off. You know what? I'm going to look this up. I'm going to look up if they used that maple sugar in their pies and things. So remember to ask me during class, and I'll tell you what I found out. Don't let me forget. Okay, day after day, the sap was running, and every morning Almanzo went with Father to gather and boil it. Every night, Mother sugared it off. I wonder how many times they had to do that. They made all the sugar they could use next year. Then the last boiling of syrup was not sugared off. It was stored in jugs down the cellar, and that was the year's syrup. Oh, that's what they use on their pancakes and stuff. When Alice came home from school, she smelled Almanzo and she cried out, "Oh, you've been eating wintergreen berries!" She thought it wasn't fair that she had to go to school while Almanzo gathered sap and ate wintergreen berries. She said, "Boys have all the fun." She made Almanzo promise that he wouldn't touch the south slopes along Trout River beyond the sheep pasture. So on Saturdays, they went together to paw over those slopes. When Almanzo found a red cluster, he yelled, and when Alice found one, she squealed, and sometimes they divided and sometimes they didn't. But they went on their hands and knees all over those slopes, and they ate wintergreen berries all afternoon. I wonder what it's like to be on those slopes in a dress. Almanzo brought home a pail full of the thick green leaves, and Alice crammed them into a big bottle. Mother filled the bottle with whiskey and set it away. That was her wintergreen flavoring for cakes and cookies. Every day the snow was melting a little. The cedars and spruces shook it off, and it fell in blobs from the bare branches of oaks and maples and beeches. Beeches. We have beech trees here. I think, if I'm not mistaken, they're the ones that where you see that are white, where the bark is peeled off. We have a huge one in our side yard. All along the walls of barns and house, the snow was pitted with water falling from the icicles, and finally the icicles fell, crashing. The earth showed in wet, dark patches here and there. The patches spread. Only the trodden paths were still white, and a little snow remained on the north sides of buildings and wood piles. When the winter term of school ended and spring had come. One morning, Father drove to Malone. Before noon, he came hurrying home and shouted the news from the buggy. The New York potato buyers were in town. Y'all, I love to listen to this. Is one of my favorite parts of the potatoes and what Father did differently than everyone else in town did. Royal ran to help hitch the team to the wagon. Alice and Almanzo ran to get bushel baskets from the woodshed. They rolled them bumpity bump down the cellar stairs and held them with their potatoes and began filling them with potatoes as fast as they could. They filled 2 baskets before Father drove the wagon to the kitchen porch. Then the race began. Father and Royal hurried the baskets upstairs and dumped them into the wagon. And Almanzo and Alice hurried to fill more baskets faster than they were carried away. Almanzo tried to fill more baskets than Alice, of course he did, but he couldn't. She worked so fast that she was turning back to the bin while her hoop skirts were still whirling the other way, twisting around. When she pushed back her curls, her hands left smudges on her cheeks. Almanzo laughed at her dirty face, and she laughed at him. "Look at yourself in the glass. You're dirtier than I be." They kept the baskets full. Father and Royal never had to wait, and when the wagon was full, Father drove away in a hurry. It was mid-afternoon before he came back, but Royal and Almanzo and Alice filled the wagon again while he ate some cold dinner, and he hauled another load away. A lot of potatoes. That's a lot of work. Potatoes are a lot of work. You got to pull them up, dig them up. Anyway, that night Alice helped Royal and Almanzo do the chores. Father was not there for supper. He did not come before bedtime. Royal sat up to wait for him. Late in the night, Almanzo heard the wagon, and Royal went out to help Father carry the brush. I'm going to start that sentence over. Late in the night, Almanzo heard the wagon, and Royal went out to help Father curry and brush the tired horses who had done 20 miles of hauling that day. The next morning and the next, they all began loading by candlelight, and Father was gone with the first load before sunrise. On the third day, the potato train left for New York City, but all Father's potatoes were on it. 500 bushels at $1 a bushel, he said to Mother at supper. "I told you when potatoes were cheap last fall, they'd be high in the spring." That was $500 in the bank. And they were all proud of Father, who raised good potatoes and knew well to store them and when to sell them. So that's what I was talking about. Most of the people, they had sold their potatoes in the fall, but in the spring, he had stored them and sold them because, you got to think about when everybody's potatoes in the summertime are coming up, and I guess then fall comes and people sell them all. There's more people selling them, but you don't grow potatoes during the winter. So then in springtime, he's got all these potatoes to sell, and they can sell them for more. "All right, that's pretty good," Mother said, beaming. They all felt happy. But later, Mother said, "Well, now that's off our hands. We'll start house cleaning tomorrow, bright and early." Almanzo hated house cleaning. He had to pull up carpet tracks all around the edges of miles of carpet. Then the carpets were hung on clotheslines outdoors, and he had to beat them with a long stick. And when they didn't have vacuum cleaners, that's how they did it. When he was little, he had run under the carpets, playing like they were tents. But now he was 9 years old. He had to beat those carpets without stopping, till no more dust would come off of them. Everything in the house was moved. Everything was scrubbed and scoured and polished. All the curtains were down. All the feather beds were outdoors airing, and all the blankets and quilts were washed. From dawn till dark, Almanzo was running, pumping water, fetching wood, spreading clean straw on the scrubbed floors. Spreading clean straws on the scrubbed floors. And then helping to stretch the carpets over it, and then tracking all those edges down again. Now that's interesting that they put straw under their rugs. Days and days he spent in the cellar. He helped Royal empty the vegetable bins. They sorted out every spoiled apple and carrot and turnip and put back the good ones in a few bins that Mother had scrubbed. They took down the other bins and stored them in the woodshed. They carried out crocks and jars and jugs till the cellar was almost empty. Then Mother scrubbed the walls and floor. Royal poured water into pails of lime, and Almanzo stirred the lime till it stopped boiling and was whitewashed. Then they whitewashed the whole cellar. That was fun. I think whitewashing is kind of like painting. Mercy on us, Mother said when they came upstairs. Did you get as much whitewash on the cellar as you got on yourselves? The whole cellar was fresh and clean and snow white when it dried. Mother moved her milk pans down to the scrubbed shelves. The butter tubs were scoured white with sand and dried in the sun, and Almanzo set them in a row on the clean cellar floor to be filled with the summer's butter. Outdoors, the lilacs and the snowball bushes were in bloom. Yay, it's springtime. Violets and buttercups were blossoming in the green pastures. Birds were building their nests, and it was time to work in the fields. That is a good paragraph. That painted a picture in my head. Scriptive sentences. Okay, the end for chapter 10.